Orleans, as in the rest of the world, the best jazz of all is not played in the nightclubs on Bourbon Street or the recording studios, but after hours, at somebody's house here in New Orleans, at a party. Yes, when musicians play to each other from the heart, there's no thought about time or tomorrow or anything but jazz. That's when you hear the kind of jazz you find on television only on our Jazz Party. Among the men who made history, who started jazz in the cradle. This first portion of our salute to New Orleans we call the Buddy Bolden era, from 1880 to 1907. This was the beginning of jazz. Let's take a look at some of the faces, some of the folks who sort of grew up in that particular period of New Orleans history. See them and get to know them a little bit. For these are the men and one woman who helped make jazz history. There's, on our very fine piano, Sweet Emma Barrett. On the guitar there, we have one of our best pals, Mr. George Guesnon. See George over there? Emma, how are you today?
Fine.
Good, good. I think we ought to start the excitement right now with a little opus, if you can take your eyes off that racetrack sheet there and just tell me what you think the boys might start off with in fine style.
Saints come marching in.
Saints? Well, fine. Sweet Emma Barrett has bells on her legs. She plays it, too. We are underway here in New Orleans with our salute to the Buddy Bolden era. Buddy Bolden was quite a man. I can't picture a picture of him because, well, there's not even a very good photograph still available of Buddy Bolden, but he started what might be called all this jazz way back in the 1880s. He was a barber on Franklin Street. As I talk to you about him, I want you to see the faces of the people who were of his era, his time, for he was the most fabulous figure of all in jazz, Buddy Bolden. You don't hear much about him today? Well, it's been a long time, since the 1880s. So let's look at some of our musicians, see if we can see in their face a few memories of Buddy Bolden as I talk about him. He was a barber on Franklin Street here in New Orleans, played his first dance at Tin Type Hall. At the end of the Spanish-American War, he was no longer Buddy or Kid Bolden, but he was King Bolden. One night at Lincoln Park, when Jean Robichaud had the opposition band in the park, and it was time for Buddy to play in another area of town, he stuck his horn through a little hole in the fence that was around Lincoln Park and just blew as best he could. He said, "I'm calling my children." His children heard him, and they all came and left Lincoln Park and poured Jean Robichaud all alone. So it went for many years for Buddy Bolden, up until 1907. Buddy Bolden's blues, Buddy Bolden's memories, Buddy Bolden's fame, the most fabulous part of all of New Orleans jazz history. Buddy's gone, but these folks you see sitting here today were of his time, his era. They listened to him, played with him, were inspired by him, grew up under the shadow of a man whose fame is almost forgotten today. But for this moment, it's bright once again. For this half hour is Buddy Bolden's. He's as big a king right now as he ever was back in the 1880s here in New Orleans. I'd like you to meet two or three of the musicians right now before we go on to our next number. On clarinet, can we take a peek at our clarinet doctor over there? Mr. George Lewis. George Lewis has been playing for 51 years. He was born on Dauphin Street here in New Orleans, and at 7 years of age, his family was living behind the Hope Dance Hall. One day his mother gave him a 25-cent piece and said, "Go out and buy yourself a toy." He did. He bought a tin fife, and that led him eventually to his clarinet. It was at 16 he bought a second-hand clarinet. For a short period of time, he warmed up and got a job with a little band called the Black Eagles. He played his first funeral march in 1923 with the Eureka Jazz Band, and after that he formed his own band. Played with Bunk Johnson. He's one of the truly superb New Orleans clarinet men. He's toured Europe, and he's been acclaimed by all jazz critics as the very best, Mr. George Lewis. Over on drums, let's take a look at our good friend Paul Barbarin. Paul, of course, comes from a very famous family. Played with King Oliver, Louis Armstrong. 1901, he made his first sound, but it wasn't on drums. He was just crying. Now, of course, the fellow I want you to meet last in this portion of our little introductions is Punchy, 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 Punchy Miller. Punchy Miller was born December 1897. There he is. He studied with Jim Humphrey. Around the turn of the century, he played with Jack Carey's band. He and Jack worked out the fast riff, a little passage that's become the third strain of a tune that they called Jack Carey. Years later, this tune was introduced to the world by the original Dixieland Jazz Band, and you and I know it, this tune that he and Jack started, you and I know it as the Tiger Rag. He's the man who put the growl into the tiger. Back in 1923, Punch Miller, in a famous battle of trumpets at Italian Hall, was taken on by Sam Morgan. Sam beat him in the first battle, but second time around, a month later, in a historic rematch, they met again, and Punch Miller won with all honors, including $25 and a silver cup. It's a long time ago. They introduced him that night as Punchy, 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 Punchy Miller, and he's still known that way. Buddy Bolden, the man who started the era of New Orleans jazz. They wrote a song about him. Punch, could you sing it? You know, Buddy Bolden's Blues. All right.
out, cat, you better take it away. Yeah, man. Oh, look out, cat, you better take it away. That's what everybody say. I thought I heard Frankie Houston shout, open up that window, let the band out. Open up the window, let the band out. That's what I heard Frankie Houston shout. Oh, I thought I heard Judge Forbes red, 25 dollars on the day. $25 off the day. That's what I hope he said. He said, ba-ba-boo-doo, bee-ba-boo-doo, bee-ba, bee-ba. That's what I heard Judge Forbes say.
And there it is. There's Buddy Bolden living again in Jelly Roll Morton's famous Buddy Bolden Blues. Thank you, Punchy Punch. I'd like you to meet some more of the folks in this group who make up the elder statesmen of New Orleans jazz, these folks who were of the Buddy Bolden era. Now let's take a look at piano and bass and violin right now. Over on the bass, right over here, we have a man who started out in the Undertaker's Band. It's one of the early New Orleans bands. Yes, sir. The Undertaker's Band was the place where slow drag began to get going. You were born in 1888, slow drag? You don't look a day over 18. You also worked with Bunk Johnson, I know, and still one of the most beloved and most talented of all the bassmen in New Orleans. On piano, well, look who we have on piano. We have a sweetheart for anybody's band here, Sweet Emma Barrett. Sweet Emma Barrett, and I asked Sweet Emma before how old she was, and she told me a lady after 40, a lady doesn't have to answer, and I quite go along with that, so Emma, you don't have to answer. She's played with Papa Celestin. She played with Ridgely's original Tuxedo Orchestra back in 1925. Sometimes they call her the Bell Girl or Dusty Emma, but right now, well, we just call her wonderful, and I think that you'll find that as she moves along, those bells and the piano work together in perfect harmony. In the Buddy Bolden era, violin took the lead in many of the performances of jazz. Peter Bocage, who played in that era, one of the few, if not the last, left in New Orleans, was born in 1887 in Algiers, right across the river. He's played for 53 years. Peter Bocage started with Billy Marrero's Superior Orchestra in 1905. He helped the famed Bunk Johnson learn to read music. And he's a fellow who's been out of work only once. From 1910 to 1913, he played with Papa Celestin at the Tuxedo Dance Hall. And one Sunday in April of that year, 1913, the owner of the Tuxedo and the owner of the hall across the street shot it out. And both were lying there dead when the police arrived. The police didn't like that very much, and there was no music on that block for 3 or 4 months. And during that time, my good friend Pete was taking it easy. But he worked later, and of course started with King Oliver and became one of the truly famous and beloved New Orleans jazzmen. I think I'll turn back to Emma just for a second, see if she's got an inspiration for us. What do you suppose we might continue our little party with, Emma? You got something in mind?
Careless Love.
Careless Love? I'm with you all the way. That's it. There it is. The bloody golden era come to life here in New Orleans tonight. Here on Jazz Party. Sweet Emma. Sweet Emma, one of your bells have sunk down. They went down to your ankle from up to your knee there. How long have you been playing with the bells on the leg? About 2 years. I think that's wonderful. And you've got a little bow on the bells, too. Those are the fancy ones. Very nice indeed. We have extra touches here tonight in New Orleans. The Buddy Bolden era was the beginning for New Orleans jazz. And now, as we told you, we're going to tell the story of New Orleans jazz in 3 chapters. And I think the 1907 to 1940, which we touch on Jelly Roll Morton, that particular chapter will be equally as fascinating. And from 1940 to 1958, with the chapter having to do with what is now called the present-day Dixieland music of New Orleans. But this particular half hour of music is part of jazz history as it is being played. For these folks are representative of an era that's almost past. And we're so pleased indeed to have them all together here having fun at a party. We've had no rehearsals. I think you'll all go with me on that. We didn't rehearse a bit today. We just all came here. And I think some of you probably, getting through this very, very hot New Orleans day, would like to be sitting on that brass bed back there instead of standing in front of it. If you want to, go ahead and sit down on the edge of it. Go ahead. Relax. Go ahead there, George. Punchy. You can sit on that chair if you want. Yeah, why not? Got to learn how to... That's it. Learn how to stretch your energy, you know. We've got a nice number coming up now. I hope that George Lewis promised me we'd do Bucket's Got a Hole in It, which is a wonderful old tune of the Bolden era. And I think if somebody will give the beat to somebody else, anything could happen right now. Yes, sir. Jazz party here in New Orleans, the Buddy Bolden era. These are the men and one lady who are bringing the era to life here in an informal setting in New Orleans. Punch Miller, Punchy Miller on trumpet. We have Paul Barbarin, George Lewis, Peter Bocage, slow drag Pavageau, Georges Guesnon, sweet Emma Barrett, and of course Louis Nelson. I think maybe now, just to prove that we have rehearsed this and that we're playing for fun, could we get together a blues? Any kind of a blues? George, maybe you might give him the beat on it and the key, but as for that, we don't care. Just whatever you feel like playing. Have a little conference there. There's no rush. Buddy Bolden era. 1890-1907, the beginning of jazz in New Orleans. And now, in the person of one man, we have a thread that links us with Buddy Bolden in the past. A wonderful man, too. I'd like you to meet him right now. His name, Alphonse Picou, one of the giants of American jazz, a young man who's certainly over 18. Alphonse, how old are you now?
I stopped counting the age.
You stopped counting the years? Well, maybe that's why you're not really old at all, but very young. I know you started playing with the Accordiana Band in 1894. In 1897, you started your own band at Hope's Hall with George Moret's band. You played in 1913. You played at the World's Fair in 1913. Then with the Tuxedo Brass Band, one of the most famous. Now, let me tell you something very interesting about Alphonse. One of the reasons he is part of jazz history and will always be. He developed the clarinet obbligato to a march tempo, and that's what we call high society, one of the most famous of all jazz tunes. It's been a little while since you first played it. Do you think you could play it for us tonight?
I'm going to try.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Good?
Wonderful, Alphonse. You try. We're all with you.
Yes, I will, please.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Alphonse. You're wonderful. You know, there's a man who's, well, I won't say how old he is, but he stopped counting at 40. It was only halfway through his life. And maybe a little bit more, I don't know. Alphonse Picou, who first played high society, plays it for you tonight. And it's not so easy to play when you're Alphonse's age, but I thought he did a wonderful job. The Buddy Bolden era, 1890, 1907. And there was one of the men who wrote that era in the New Orleans sands with his heart, with his clarinet, Alphonse Picou. (1890, 1907), the Buddy Bolden era. Perhaps for the last time, these jazzmen are playing together here on Jazz Party. When they're gone, all that remains of the original New Orleans jazz glory is gone with them. We thank them for being here tonight. We thank you for being with us. This has been part one of our Jazz Party series on New Orleans, the cradle of jazz.